The front door closed behind him, and for a moment, the only sound in the entire penthouse was the soft click of the latch catching. Kang Min-jae stood in the entryway and let the silence settle over him, the way it always did when he came home late. He loosened his tie with one hand, the other still holding his briefcase, and exhaled slowly through his nose. 41 floors above Atlanta. Buckhead glittering through the floor-to-ceiling glass, rain tracing slow lines down the windows, like the city was trying to write something he'd never bothered to read. He was tired. Not the physical kind, the kind that lives behind the eyes. He set his briefcase down on the entry table and reached up to unbutton his collar. And then he heard it. Laughter. His hand stopped. From the living room. Low, easy laughter, not the television, not a phone call. Real, present. Multiple voices, warm and unhurried, like people who had been comfortable for hours. His wife's laugh was in there somewhere. He hadn't heard it in a long time. He checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. Jasmine was never awake this late, not anymore. Min-jae picked up his briefcase again, slowly, and walked toward the living room with the measured, deliberate step of a man who had spent 20 years making sure rooms went quiet when he entered them. He turned the corner and stopped. The living room lights were fully on. The rain hit the glass behind them like static. Jasmine stood near the center of the room in a gray cardigan and jeans, her hair natural and loose, one hand resting on the back of the couch. And around her stood 4 men, black men, tall, present, unmistakably at ease in his home. Strangers, all 4 of them. Not delivery men, not service workers, not anyone Min-jae had ever seen in his life. One of them had a jacket folded over the arm of his chair like he'd been there long enough to get comfortable. Another sat at the edge of the couch, with his elbows on his knees. The third stood near the window, arms crossed loosely, watching nothing in particular. The fourth stood just behind Jasmine, hands folded in front of him, and he alone was the one smiling, not at Min-jae, just generally, like he found life soft and interesting even when it wasn't. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Jasmine turned her head first, and the moment she saw Min-jae, the ease left her face entirely. Min-jae? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. There was no guilt in it exactly, but there was something, the particular tension of a person standing at the intersection of 2 worlds that were never supposed to meet tonight. One of the men shifted his weight, not aggressively, but the room recalibrated. Everyone sensed it. Min-jae's jaw tightened. His eyes moved across the 4 of them slowly, the way a man takes inventory before deciding what's been stolen. His hand adjusted its grip on the briefcase. "What is this?" The words came out low. Controlled. The kind of low that wasn't quiet because he was calm. It was quiet because he was deciding. Jasmine stepped toward him. "Please, I can explain." "Explain." He said it back to her like it was a word from another language. Flat. Then his voice rose, just slightly, just enough. "Explain why there are 4 men in my house at midnight." The man near the window, the one with the jacket, raised both his hands slowly. Palms out, no rush. "No disrespect, sir. We were just..." Min-jae's gaze snapped to him like a shutter closing. "Don't talk in my house." The air changed. Even the man with the calm smile went still. Jasmine looked between them, something tightening in her expression. "Min-jae, please, just listen for 1 minute." But he wasn't listening. He was looking past Jasmine, past all of them to the dining table, visible just beyond the living room archway. 5 plates, 5 chairs pulled out and arranged with the particular care of someone who had planned an evening. Water glasses, food covered and resting, napkins folded. Not a spontaneous gathering, not an accident. Prepared. Like they had been waiting for him. Min-jae's voice dropped to something colder than anger. You invited them here. No, it's not what... This is my house. He said it with the careful precision of a man who had worked for every inch of what he owned and had never once let himself forget it. Then, so tell me exactly what you think you are doing before I decide what happens next. And nobody answered. Not one of them. Only the rain. Welcome to Afro-Korean drama. Every story on this channel is written and creatively produced right here, original from the ground up for you. This one explores something I've been turning over for a while. What happens when a man has spent so long protecting himself that he can no longer tell the difference between a threat and a truth? If you're the kind of person who loves drama with real emotional weight behind it, you're exactly where you need to be. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know who's up with me for this one. Now let's go back in. Min-jae pulled out his phone and called the front desk in 3 words. Security now, Penthouse. Then he put the phone away and stood in the doorway like he owned the geometry of the room, which technically he did. His eyes moved from face to face, unhurried, cataloging. The man near the window, the one who had tried to speak, had a stillness about him that Min-jae recognized instinctively. Not the stillness of submission, the stillness of a man who had learned through something hard. That stillness was stronger than noise. He was broad-shouldered, maybe early 40s, with a kind of face that looked like it had been through weather and come out calmer for it. He hadn't put his hands down yet, just kept them steady at chest height, palms visible, like he was giving Min-jae every possible visual signal that this was not what it looked like. The one sitting on the couch's edge hadn't moved at all. He was lean, younger, with close-cropped hair and dark eyes that tracked Min-jae's every movement. Not with hostility, but with the quiet attention of someone reading a situation they didn't fully trust yet. His arms were uncrossed now. His hands rested on his knees. He was watching Min-jae's hands, not his face. The third man, still near the back window, had his arms crossed loosely across his chest. He wasn't looking at Min-jae anymore. He was looking at Jasmine, just watching her, the way you watch someone you'd step in front of a car for, waiting to see if she needed anything. And the fourth, the one with the soft smile, stood slightly apart from the others with his hands folded loosely in front of him. He was older than the rest, or at least he carried himself that way. There was something about him that made the whole room feel marginally less dangerous. Like a single candle in a space where everyone was arguing about electricity. Min-jae hated that he noticed. Nobody is leaving this room, he said. Agreed, said the man near the window. Calm, direct, no pushback, no defiance, just a statement of fact delivered in the same register Min-jae had used. Like the man had heard that tone before and had long since stopped being impressed by it. Min-jae looked at him more carefully. Who are you? My name is Malik. No last name offered, no title, just Malik, stated like it was enough. And the only reason I'm still standing here without trying to leave is because Jasmine asked us to wait, so we're waiting. Jasmine asked you, Min-jae repeated. Yes. In my home. Malik didn't blink. In your home. There was something almost maddening about the man. He wasn't being aggressive. He wasn't performing calm, like it was just his actual state, and that made it worse because Min-jae had spent his career knowing that the most dangerous people in any room were the ones who genuinely didn't need to win the argument. "You're reacting before you understand," Malik said. That was the wrong sentence. Min-jae stepped forward. "Don't tell me how I'm reacting in my own—" "Min-jae." Jasmine's voice, quiet but precise, cut right through him. He stopped. She wasn't pleading anymore. She had composed herself in the last 30 seconds. He could see it happen in real time, the way she did that, the way she always had. That particular ability to go still inside herself and speak from somewhere underneath the panic. He used to admire it. Right now he found it infuriating. "You need to hear this before security gets here," she said. "Because if you don't, you're going to do something you can't walk back." "I'm not doing anything yet," he said. "That's the most dangerous thing you've said all night," said the lean one on the couch. Everyone looked at him. He tilted his head just slightly, meeting Min-jae's gaze without aggression. "You walked in here with a conclusion already formed. I can see it. You're not asking questions to find answers. You're asking questions to confirm what you've already decided." A pause. "That's not investigation, that's self-defense." Min-jae stared at him. "Xavier," Jasmine said, not a warning exactly, just his name. "I'm not wrong," Xavier said mildly. "I didn't say you were." Min-jae looked between them, the easy shorthand of people who had been in the same room many times, who knew each other's sentences before they were finished. Something about it tightened in his chest in a way he didn't want to examine. "Did you ever ask Jasmine what she does at night?" Malik asked. His voice was still that same unhurried register, like the question required no particular weight beyond its own. "Or did you just assume she was here?" The lobby buzzer sounded through the intercom. "Security." Min-jae moved toward the panel, and Jasmine crossed the room in 6 steps, pulled open the panel cover, and pressed the lock-hold button. The buzzer cut off. Everyone went still. Min-jae turned around slowly. Jasmine stood with her hand still on the panel, her back straight, eyes meeting his without flinching. "Nobody leaves," she said. "Not them, not you, not until you've heard the whole thing." For a long moment, he just looked at her. This woman, his wife of 6 years. Who had stopped arguing with him sometime around year 4? Who had stopped asking him to come to bed? Stopped waiting up? Stopped setting one plate at the table on the nights he worked late? Who had become, without either of them fully acknowledging it, someone who occupied the same address but not the same life? He hadn't thought of it that way until this moment. "You locked the door," he said. "Yes." "Against my security. Against everyone who would let you leave this room before you actually listened." The older man, the one with the folded hands, made a small sound. Not quite a laugh, something more like recognition. Min-jae looked at him sharply. "Forgive me," the man said gently, his accent carrying the soft lilt of somewhere West African. Lagos, maybe, or Accra, the vowels rounded and warm. "I am not laughing at you. I am simply familiar with this moment. When a man realizes the door he thought he controlled was never really his to close." He unfolded his hands and gestured softly at the room. "My name is Coffee, and I promise you everything you are afraid of right now is a misunderstanding." "I'm not afraid," Min-jae said. Coffee smiled. "I know. That's what I'm saying." Min-jae stood there for another 3 seconds. Then he turned away from the intercom panel and faced the room fully. "Talk," he said. Malik nodded once. He moved to the armchair, not the one that was Minjai's, not the one closest to the door, and sat down the way a man sits when he's about to say something that requires patience to receive. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, hands loosely clasped. 3 years ago, he said, a woman showed up at a community center on Campbellton Road, not as a volunteer, not as a donor. She showed up asking if she could help run a workshop for the kids we were losing to the system. Told us she had a background in youth counseling. Told us she had time. He glanced at Jasmine briefly. Didn't tell us anything else about herself. Minjai's gaze shifted to Jasmine. She wasn't looking at him. Over the next 6 months, Malik continued, she became something none of us were expecting. Not a donor, not a part-time helper. She became the reason 3 kids didn't age out of foster care without someone knowing their names. She became the reason Derek over there. He gestured toward the lean man at the window. Got a counselor after his second stint inside instead of going back in a 3rd time. Derek didn't say anything. He just moved his gaze from the window to Minjai, brief and flat, and then back. She became, Malik said, the emotional center of something that was barely surviving, and she did it quietly. For 3 years. He paused. We're not here because we have any claim to her. We're here because she called us tonight and said she needed to finally stop hiding what she'd built. The room held the silence for a moment. Minjai's expression hadn't changed, but something in it had shifted. Just slightly. The clean certainty of the story he'd walked in with was beginning to develop hairline fractures. What foundation? He said. Derek stood up. He moved to the dining table without a word and opened a battered canvas bag that had been sitting under one of the chairs. Minjai hadn't noticed it, and the fact that he hadn't noticed something in his own home made him tense again. Derek pulled out a manila folder, then another, then a third. He spread them across the table with the careful precision of someone who had arranged and rearranged these documents many times. He didn't say anything. He just looked at Minjai and gestured at the table. Minjai walked over. He didn't want to be curious. He told himself he wasn't curious, that this was a professional instinct, the same one that made him review contracts at midnight and read footnotes other people skipped. He picked up the first folder. Foundation registration documents. State of Georgia, filed 18 months ago. The name at the top of the Still Water Project meant nothing to him. He flipped to the financial disclosure page, and then he went very still. The primary funding source was listed as a charitable redirection from the Kang Foundation corporate giving arm. Amounts, dates, transfer documentation. All of it clean and traceable, none of it hiding. The money had moved through legitimate channels, not stolen, not embezzled in any traditional sense, redirected, specifically, deliberately. From the portion of the Kang Foundation's annual giving budget that Minjai had in the last 4 years, left entirely to his CFO to manage because he hadn't had the bandwidth to care. He set the folder down, picked up the second one. Program outcomes, children served, names of partnering organizations, a youth legal defense nonprofit in Vine City, a trauma-informed school program in College Park, a transitional housing liaison in Southwest Atlanta. Real programs, real addresses, real outcomes documented in the dry, specific language of people who were not performing charity, but doing work. He set that folder down too. This money, he said, came from you, Jasmine said quietly from across the room. Technically, yes. You redirected Kang Foundation funds. I redirected the portion that was sitting unallocated for 3 consecutive years because nobody was making decisions about it. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the thing underneath it, not defiance, but the particular exhaustion of a person who had rehearsed this conversation so many times in private that saying it aloud felt less like confrontation and more like relief. Min-jae, that money was designated for charitable community investment. That's what it's doing. That's not your call to make. I know. Then why? Because I tried to make it your call, she said. 3 times. I brought you proposals. You were in Singapore for the first one, closing the Daejin acquisition. The second time you read the first page and said you'd get back to me. The third time, she stopped, looked down briefly. You weren't really there for the third time. The room was quiet enough that the rain on the glass sounded like something deliberate. Xavier, who had been sitting silently for the last several minutes, leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling briefly before bringing his gaze back to Min-jae. You want to be angry about the money, he said. That's easier to be angry about. Finances have rules. Rules have violations. Violations have consequences you can assign. He paused. But the thing that's actually happening right now is that your wife built an entire life of purpose in the spaces you left empty. And you didn't know about it. And that, he let the word land without editorializing, is the thing that's really sitting in your chest right now. Min-jae looked at him for a long time. You don't know what's in my chest, he said. No, Xavier agreed. But I've been watching your hand since you walked in, and you stopped touching your tie about 4 minutes ago, which means some part of you stopped trying to control the room. A small pause. That's not nothing. Min-jae looked down at his hands. They were loose at his sides. He hadn't noticed. He picked up his briefcase again. Not to leave, just to hold it. An old habit, something solid. From somewhere deeper in the penthouse, past the living room and through the hallway that led to the guest wing, there was a sound. Small feet on marble. Everyone in the room heard it, and everyone in the room reacted differently. Kavli turned, his head with the soft attention of someone who had been listening for it. Derek went still in a different way. Less guarded, more careful, the way large men go still around small children. Xavier straightened slightly. Malik's expression changed in the way that expressions change when something genuinely important enters the room. And then the boy appeared. He was maybe 8 years old. Small for his age, wearing an oversized Atlanta Hawks t-shirt that came down past his shorts. His hair needed a shape-up, his socks didn't match. He had the particular look of a child who had been asleep and woken up by the sound of raised voices. Heavy-eyed, uncertain, but not afraid because he had apparently long since stopped associating raised voices with danger. He looked around the room once, found Malik, and walked directly to him. Malik opened his arm without being asked, and the boy tucked himself under it with the ease of someone stepping into a familiar space, and looked at Min-jae with the frank, uncomplicated curiosity of a child who had not yet learned to perform. "Who's that?" the boy asked. "That's Mr. Kang," Malik said. The boy looked at Min-jae for another moment. "Is he mad?" "He was," Malik said. "He's thinking now." The boy seemed to accept this as satisfactory and leaned his head against Malik's arm. Min-jae stood there. Something in the room had changed, and he couldn't have named exactly what it was. Not the facts. None of the facts had changed. But the architecture of the situation had shifted under him without warning. The way a floor you were certain about will sometimes give slightly, and remind you that nothing is as solid as you need it to be. He looked at Jasmine. She was watching him watch the boy. "His name is Damon," she said, quietly, without pressure. "He's been staying with us 3 nights a week for the past 7 months. His grandmother can't manage him on her own anymore. She's 68 and working 2 jobs. He was going to end up in placement." She paused. "I didn't tell you because I already knew what you'd say." "What would I say?" "You'd say we should write a check, find a program, handle it properly." She said it without cruelty, just fact. You wouldn't have seen him as a child who needed a place to feel safe. You would have seen him as a problem with a financial solution. Min-jae didn't argue. That was almost worse. Damon had fallen back asleep against Malik's arm, barely aware of the room. The Hawks logo on his shirt was faded from washing. On the floor beside Malik's chair, barely visible, was a small backpack, child-sized, worn at the straps. A laminated photograph was tucked through the outer pocket zipper, the kind of lamination a school library does for $1. The picture faced outward. Min-jae looked at it. A man and a boy. Younger version of Damon, standing in front of a chain-link fence. Industrial setting in the background. Concrete and corrugated metal. The man had his hand on Damon's shoulder and was laughing at something off camera. He was wearing a work uniform. Min-jae looked closer. The logo on the uniform was partially visible. He recognized it. The recognition arrived before understanding did, the way bad news always works. His mind processed the logo before the meaning followed. And then the meaning followed. KMJ Industrial. His subsidiary. The warehousing and logistics facility he'd acquired 4 years ago as part of the southeastern expansion. The one that had been flagged in an internal audit 18 months ago for structural compliance issues. The one where, 14 months ago, a section of roof had collapsed during a night shift. 2 workers died. Min-jae had signed the settlement agreements. He had never attended the funerals. He had never read the workers' names in anything other than a legal document. He stood there holding his briefcase and looking at a laminated photograph of a man who no longer existed, and the man's son sleeping against the arm of a stranger who had been more present in 3 years than Min-jae had been in his own home. Derek said from somewhere behind him. His name was Marcus Webb. He worked the 3 to 11 shift. He said it like he had said it before many times to different people, like he was tired of having to say it and would keep saying it anyway. Damon was 5 when it happened. He doesn't remember the details. He just knows his father went to work and didn't come home. Min-jae set his briefcase down, not carefully. Just let it go. It hit the marble floor with a sound that was too loud for the room, and everybody heard it and nobody said anything. Xavier stood up slowly and moved to stand near the window, not quite beside Min-jae, not quite far from him either. He looked out at the rain for a moment before he spoke. "This is not about tonight anymore," he said. His voice was quiet, not unkind, but not soft either. The way a doctor's voice is when they've decided you can handle the truth. You came in here ready to manage a scandal, find the problem, contain the damage, establish the terms. That's your instinct. That's how you've handled everything since Jasmine lost the baby. A pause, deliberate, waited. But that's not what's in this room. What's in this room is everything you've been managing around instead of through for 4 years. Min-jae's jaw worked. "Don't," he started. "I'm not attacking you," Xavier said. "I'm telling you what I see." And what I see is a man who loved his wife and lost his child and decided, somewhere in the grief, that the safest thing to do was to become someone who couldn't be reached. Because if you're not reachable, you can't be hurt again. He turned from the window and looked at Min-jae directly. Jasmine didn't stop loving you. She stopped trying to reach someone who'd moved the address. The rain was heavier now. Min-jae stood in the center of the room and didn't speak. Jasmine had moved to the armchair nearest the window. Not his chair, not a power position, just a place to sit. Her hands were in her lap. She was looking at the floor, and he knew that look, had known it for years without understanding it. The particular angle of her head when she was holding something painful that she'd held alone long enough that the weight of it was just part of how she stood. "I tried," she said. "I need you to know I tried." "I know," he said. The words surprised him when they came out. But they were true. "After we lost the baby," she continued, "you went to work, and I understood that. I understood it because I knew you, knew how you were built, knew that doing things was how you processed not being able to do anything. But then you didn't come back." She looked up at him. "You just stayed there, in the doing. And I waited. And then one day I stopped waiting, and I built something instead. Because I couldn't keep sitting in this apartment, loving a ghost." Coffee spoke then, for the first time in a long while. "She saved us," he said simply, "before she ever met us." His voice had the quality of a man who had seen enough of the world to know that some truths are just plainly true and don't require embellishment. "I came to this country from Accra 20 years ago. I have buried neighbors, students, people I loved. I have watched systems take children the way a river takes soil, without malice, without memory. And I have learned that the people who hold communities together are almost never the ones with the most power." He looked at Min-jae calmly. "They are the ones who show up, even when it costs them something." A silence settled that felt different from the ones before it. Not the silence of tension, the silence of something changing shape. Min-jae stood in it for a long time. He looked at Damon, still asleep against Malik's arm. He looked at the table. 5 plates. The food gone cold by now. He looked at Jasmine. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not hopeful, not guarded. Something more honest than either. The look of someone who had already decided to stop managing his reaction and just let whatever was going to happen, happen. He thought about everything he'd signed and not signed, read and not read, attended and not attended. The settlements, the proposals she'd brought him. The third time, when she said he wasn't really there, he hadn't been. He knew that. He thought about sitting in a hospital room at 3 a.m. holding the hand of a woman he loved more than he had ever been able to say out loud, after the worst night of both their lives, and thinking, if I stay still, I'll break. So he'd started moving. And he hadn't stopped. He looked at Malik. Malik was watching him the way you watch weather, not with judgment, not with eagerness, just with a particular quality of attention that acknowledged something was happening and was willing to wait for what came next. Min-jae had expected when he walked into this room to be the most powerful person in it, and technically, legally, financially, he still was. His name was on the deed, the accounts, the corporate structures that touched every material thing in the space, but the room didn't feel that way. The room felt like Jasmine's, like it always had, actually. He just hadn't been here enough to notice. He bent down. He picked up his briefcase and then, slowly, he set it aside, against the wall, out of reach. Not putting it down in frustration this time, putting it down the way you set something down, when you've decided, at least for now, that you don't need it. He pulled out the dining chair nearest to him and sat down, not at the head, just at the table. Malik watched him. Didn't say anything. Xavier had turned from the window. He wasn't analyzing now, he was just standing there, one hand in his pocket, watching. Derek remained near the back of the room. His arms weren't crossed anymore. He hadn't sat down, but his shoulders were different, still watchful. But the particular tension that comes from proximity to threat had eased by degrees. Kofi's small, warm smile returned. He nodded once, the way you nod when something you believed was possible has proven possible. Damon stirred in his sleep and murmured something unintelligible, and Malik adjusted his arm around the boy without thinking about it. Jasmine looked at Minjai from across the room. He looked back at her. "What do you need?" he said. Not a statement. A question. Quiet, uncertain, not a CEO asking about resources, a man asking something he didn't know how to ask because he'd spent years forgetting there was a difference. "From me. What do you need from me?" Jasmine stared at him. The question seemed to take something out of her that she hadn't known she was still holding. He watched her breathe through it. One slow breath through her nose, her hands pressing together in her lap. "I need you to listen," she said, "tonight, for as long as it takes." "Okay," he said. Malik looked at Minjai for a long moment, then he said, "Presence, not power." He said it plainly, the way he said everything, like it was just a fact of physics. That's what she needs, that's what all of this needs. Not a check, not a structure, just a person who shows up and stays. Minjai nodded slowly. He wasn't sure he knew how to do that anymore, but he was sitting in the chair. That was a start. And so the night continued. Not resolved, not healed, but open the way a window is open, the air moving through it, the temperature changing, the space between inside and outside, no longer fixed. Malik talked first. He talked about the center on Campbellton Road, about the kids who aged out of the system into nothing, about what Jasmine had built there, not by funding it, but by being in it, present, consistent, learning names, remembering details, showing up on Tuesdays even when she was tired. He talked about what consistency means to children who have never experienced it, how a person who keeps showing up eventually becomes the definition of safety. Minjai listened. Derek, who rarely spoke more than necessary, spoke twice, once to clarify a date in the Foundation's history, once, quietly, to say something Minjai would think about for a long time. The kids don't need perfect. They need real. Real is harder to find. Xavier talked about the psychology of presence, not in clinical terms, not lecturing, just explaining what he'd seen in 20 years of working with people who had been failed by systems and by individuals. How absence communicates things that no amount of money can uncommunicate. How a child learns what love looks like, not from what people say, but from what they do when it's inconvenient. He looked at Minjai when he said that last part. Minjai didn't look away. Kofi talked about his own children, back in Accra, who had grown up and had children of their own. About the things he wished he had understood earlier about what a father's presence means. Not provision, presence. How he had been fortunate enough to learn it before it was too late. He said he didn't know if Minjai was fortunate in that regard. Only Minjai could know that. Some storms, Kofi said, in the particular way he said things that sounded old and were, "Don't destroy you. They introduce you to yourself." Min-jae looked at the table for a while after that. Around 2 in the morning, Jasmine made coffee. Not because it was time for coffee, but because her hands needed something to do, and because it was something normal in the middle of an abnormal night. She moved through the kitchen the way she always did, quiet and capable, and when she set a mug in front of Min-jae, she didn't say anything. She didn't touch him. She just set it there and went back to her chair. He picked it up. It was the first time in 4 years that she had made him coffee at 2 a.m., and he had been home to receive it. He thought about that for a while. At some point, Damon woke up fully disoriented, looked around the room, found Jasmine, and went to sit beside her. She tucked him under her arm the same way Malek had, automatic and unhurried, and the boy fell back asleep against her with the absolute boneless trust of a child who has been held enough to stop bracing. Min-jae watched this from across the table. He thought about the settlement agreements he'd signed. He thought about the 2 names in the legal documents. Marcus Webb. The other name, he was ashamed that he had to search for it. Terrence Okafor. 2 men, fathers probably, workers. People who had trusted that the building above them was safe because someone with enough authority and money had said so. He thought about what it would mean to publicly legitimize the Stillwater project. Not a quiet donation, not a redirected line item. Public, with his name on it, which meant the foundation's work and the documentation it held, including what Derek kept in that manila folder, would be part of the public record. He understood now that Jasmine had structured it this way deliberately, not to trap him, to give him a choice that she couldn't make for him. He could fund it and accept the accountability that came with it, or he could contest it and lose everything that was actually worth keeping. He sat with that for a long time. Malek had fallen quiet. He sat in the armchair across from Min-jae with his eyes half closed, not asleep, just resting in the particular way of someone who had learned to be still anywhere. He opened his eyes once and looked at Min-jae and said, without preamble, "You're thinking about the exposure." "Yes," Min-jae said. "And?" Min-jae looked at the photograph, still visible in Damon's backpack across the room, the laminated edge of Marcus Webb and his son. "And I should have gone to the funerals," he said. Malik said nothing. "I should have read the names. I should have—" Min-jae stopped himself before the sentence could become a speech, because he knew that was a habit he had, using words to structure and contain things so they couldn't touch him. He pressed 2 fingers to the corner of his eye and was quiet for a moment. "I made a decision that I won't be able to undo. The best I can do now is make decisions that are adjacent to accountability and keep making them." Malik looked at him for a moment. "That's a start," he said. The rain had softened by the time the first gray light appeared at the edges of the windows. Atlanta pre-dawn. The city quieter than it ever got during the day. The skyline present, but not yet performing. The Buckhead towers across the glass like shapes waiting to mean something. Jasmine was awake, seated at the dining table now, her coffee cup empty, her eyes on the window. Damon had been moved to the guest room at some point in the early hours. Malik had carried him, and Min-jae had watched from the hallway without going in. Derek and Xavier were in the kitchen, talking in low voices about something that had nothing to do with the night's events. Kofi sat near the window with his hands folded, watching the light change. Min-jae came to the table and sat across from Jasmine, She looked at him. He said, "I want to fund it, officially, publicly, under the Kang name." He paused. "I want to be on record." Jasmine didn't react immediately. She held what he'd said for a moment, turning it over, the way you turn something over when you're not sure yet if it's what it looks like. "That's going to raise questions," she said. "About the factory." "I know. Lawyers are going to recommend against it." "I know." "Why now?" she asked, not accusatory, genuinely wanting to understand. "Because I've been making decisions based on what they protect me from," he said, "and I want to try making one based on something else." Jasmine looked at him for a long time. He thought she might cry. She didn't. She just looked at him with that expression he hadn't seen in years, the one that meant she was deciding how much to believe, the one that meant she still cared enough to be careful about it. Xavier came back from the kitchen with a glass of water and set it on the table and said, without looking at either of them, "Change is not spoken. It is repeated." "I know," Min-jae said. "I wasn't saying it to you." Xavier sat down. "I was saying it to her." Jasmine almost smiled. Almost. Derek, leaning in the kitchen doorway now, arms crossed again, but differently. Not protective, just habitual, and said, "We'll need to restructure the foundation documentation. If Kang is going public, the board needs to be properly constituted. Jasmine should be chair, not just a participant." "Agreed," Min-jae said. Derek looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Once. It was the most Derek had given him all night. Coffee rose from his chair near the window, unhurried, and stretched slightly. The stretch of an older man who had been sitting too long. He looked at Min-jae and said, "You are not the same man who walked through that door last night." "I don't know what man I am yet," Min-jae said honestly. Coffee nodded like that was exactly the right answer. Malik had come back from the guest room and stood in the doorway to the hall, jacket back over his arm, watching the room. "We're going to head out," he said. "Give you two some time." Min-jae nodded. One by one they gathered themselves. Derek with his canvas bag, Xavier with his jacket, Kofi with the slow, unhurried grace of someone who moved through the world like he'd made peace with its pace. Malik unlocked the front door, and Min-jae noticed he didn't ask for permission. At the door, Malik paused. He looked at Min-jae. Not with warmth exactly, not cold either. With a directness that felt like respect. The kind extended not because of titles or money, but because of what had happened in the last several hours, and what Min-jae had chosen to do with it. "Damon wakes up at 7, Malik said. "He likes orange juice. He doesn't like to be rushed." Min-jae took that in. "Okay," he said. Malik left. The door closed, and then there were two. Min-jae and Jasmine in the penthouse above a waking city. The rain finally stopped, the light coming in flat and pale through the floor-to-ceiling glass, the 5 plates still on the table, the coffee cold, the night spent and irretrievable. Jasmine stood and walked to the window. She stood there for a while before she spoke. "Is this guilt?" she asked. "Or growth?" He came to stand beside her. Not close enough to touch, just close enough to be in the same place. He looked at the city. He thought about that. Actually thought about it the way he hadn't thought about something in a long time, without trying to arrive at an answer that made him look good or feel controlled. Just holding the question and being honest with himself about what was inside it. He thought about Damon sleeping in the guest room, about Marcus Webb's photograph, about Jasmine's face when she realized he hadn't known, about the coffee she'd made him at 2 a.m. and the way she'd set it down without asking for anything in return, I don't know yet, he said. Jasmine looked at him sideways. He met her eyes. I think it started as guilt, he said. I think it might become something else, if I let it. He paused. I don't know if you're willing to wait and see. She turned back to the window. Outside, Atlanta was starting. The first lanes of rush hour building slowly below. Somewhere down in the city, in Vine City and Campbellton and College Park in the Southwest, the work that Jasmine had built was already moving, already open, already present, already doing what it did on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and whenever a child needed somewhere to go, with or without him. I waited a long time, she said, for the wrong thing. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not waiting anymore, not the same way. She looked at him again, and this time her expression was not a door and not a wall, but something more complicated. A window, maybe. Something you could look through and not be certain of what you were seeing. But I'm still here. That means something. It means everything, he said. She didn't argue. She didn't agree. She just looked at the city and breathed, and he stood beside her. And the morning came in through the glass the way mornings come, without asking permission, without requiring anything, just arriving and making visible what the night had rearranged. Down the hall at 7 exactly, they heard the sound of small feet. Min-jae went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Orange juice. He poured a glass. This story was built for one woman who had long since stopped asking to be understood and started building something worth understanding. For every person watching who has ever redirected their love into purpose because the person they loved couldn't find the door, this one was for you. Do you think Min-jae was truly ready to change? Or was the morning just another version of control? Would you have unlocked that door the way Jasmine did? Or would you have let security in? And what would it take, if you were Jasmine, to actually believe him? Drop your thoughts below. If this kind of storytelling speaks to you, subscribe so you're here when the next one comes.